In the second part of my interview with AFDB President Dr. Akumi Adesina in Iowa last October, we had quite a bit of discussions around Nigeria and the country's agriculture sector. The AFDB chief also speaks extensively on his passion for agriculture in Africa, especially on technology and for transforming farming for the youths on the continent. Let's take a listen. The US dollars is a balance of $400 million outstanding. When will that money be coming?
I'm very proud of the fact that Nigeria is out of recession. As you know, we have three countries that we always watch very closely on the continent, and that is Nigeria, South Africa, and Algeria. Between the three of them, they account for 50% of the GDP of Africa. And so whatever affects any of those countries, for me, those economies are way too big to fail. They're just way too big to fail. And that's why you found that we rallied around Nigeria very, very strongly, because we wanted Nigeria to be able to get out of the situation of the decline of commodity prices that have severely affected the economy. I'm glad that the economy is coming out of recession, which is a good one. But there are other investment areas apart from just supporting them in terms of budget. Take the case of the power sector. We as African Development Bank, we are supporting the transmission company of Nigeria to actually make it, to repair and to upgrade the transmission lines all across Nigeria, which is very, very critical. We're supporting the Nigerian bulk electricity trader to be able to have access to money to pay the backlog of loans that they own to the generating companies and the distribution companies. And we're investing a lot of money in that. And I remember when we're also supporting the Minister of Power there, Fashola. He ran into me in Morocco, and I said, well, look, Minister, why don't you go take a look at the new Uzazate, which is in Morocco. The African Development Bank helped to build that. It is the world's largest concentrated solar power plant, which is, roughly about almost going to be about almost 500 megawatts. And of course, he went over there, and we're supporting him now to put in place a plan, so that we can have similar kind of solar power systems in Nigeria from Jigawa and other parts of the country. And so what I'm saying is that whether it is in agriculture, we're supporting a lot of work in agriculture in Nigeria. Of course, you know that I'm a great fan of the young people of Nigeria, in particular those that go into agriculture as a business. We put up a $350 million facility for Nigeria to develop literally thousands and thousands of these young people that will take agriculture as a business. We are investing in the ICT industry in Nigeria, as we are also investing in infrastructure in various parts of Nigeria. So our investment in Nigeria is a very comprehensive one. And don't forget, over 64% of our investment in Nigeria is in the private sector. Because, for me, the private sector is a lifeline of the economy. And so I think a lot of more work needs to continue to be done. And I commend the government for what's been done now to open up the space to improve the doing business. And I think, the government is also improving that. In all parts of Africa, we've got to make it easier for the private sector to operate.
So for Nigeria, Mr. President, is beyond the $600 million. The $400 million, is it still coming to Nigeria?
Well, we don't make decisions for Nigeria. Nigeria determines what they use with the money. But we are discussing with Nigeria because the economy is coming out of recession. The urgency that they had in the beginning was very pressing in terms of the debt situation. It's not as acute as it was at that time. We are discussing about how to package the $400 billion into actual investment projects, which will be, you can take a look at agriculture, you can take a look at the energy sector, you can look at the infrastructure sector, you can look at how to make small and medium-sized enterprises work. At the end of the day, it's just to make sure that the financing actually accelerates development. I think that's what the government wants, and that's what we want to see.
Very interesting news about the TAAT. What does it really mean, this new relationship, and how much will the AFDB be committing to this initiative?
Well, they just call it, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. It comes out of my own belief that the technologies to feed Africa are there, actually. You don't actually need more technologies. Today, Africa has more technologies to feed itself than Asia had in the 1960s and early 70s, and Latin America had in the same period. And so the problem is just to take those technologies to scale. That's always been the issue. And when I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, that was what I did for rice. It was a very painstaking work. I knew that Nigeria had the potential to produce high quality rice that could beat anyone that was being imported into the country. Some folks were laughing at the time. But hey, look, I never listened to all naysayers anyway. We went to it, right through it. And we released these new varieties of rice in Nigeria that was called Nerika rice. These new varieties were high quality rice varieties. And we went ahead and made sure that we reached well over 6 million farmers in Nigeria with these varieties over a 4-year period, from Jigawa to Kebbi, to Niger, to Kogi, to all across the country. It was all like that. And we boosted rice production. That's where you found the rice revolution you see today in Nigeria. That's how it came about. Same also for the wheat revolution you see in Nigeria. The point I'm making is this. If we can do that to reach millions of farmers in Nigeria, you can imagine what we can do all across the continent. And so, I discussed with my friend Jim Kim, the president of the World Bank, and we said, well, why don't we just make sure that we help Africa to feed itself by making sure that technologies that Africa has all sitting on the shelf, that we can get them to the hands of tens of millions of farmers all across the continent. And that's how the African Development Bank then developed the technologies for African agricultural transformation. It's in front of our board for approval, but we once approved, it's going to mobilize about $1 billion just for that, between the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, but also with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It is going to be the largest such effort you've ever found in Africa's history to take technologies off the shelf, to make sure they get out into farmers' field, and that we totally transform the agricultural sector of Africa. So that's the deal with what is called the TAAT.
And finally, what would you be telling hundreds of delegates here at the World Food Prize? What new message would you be giving them as far as agriculture in Africa is concerned?
Well, I'm going to be telling them a couple of things. First and foremost is that, Africa, what Africa does with food and agriculture is going to determine the future of food in the world. And therefore, we must unlock the potential of Africa's agriculture. Potential is good, but nobody eats potential. The second thing I'm going to be telling them is that to do that, we must turn agriculture totally around. That agriculture must be seen as a business, not as a social sector, not as a development activity. It's the sector that will create the highest level of inclusive growth on this continent with just vast of wealth. Because for me, as somebody who grew out of poverty myself, so I know poverty is not pretty, I know that if I can get the rural economy working, I can actually make sure that, we get a lot of kids, to go to school in rural areas. So at the end of the day, I'm going to be talking to them about making agriculture the lifeline or transforming the rural economies from zones of economic misery that they are today to zones of economic prosperity. And finally, I'm going to be telling them that it's very, very important to get young people into agriculture. Because you see, agriculture is getting increasingly sophisticated. It's in the next couple of years, you're most likely going to find the farmer of tomorrow sitting down in their home with some applications, working on some apps and moving some tractors around in their farms all by themselves. Digital world is the new world. And you need young people to get into that sector, that understand the power of innovations, the power of technology, and interfacing in the modern world that would transform agriculture into a cool sector. I must give you a secret today, maybe. When I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, as you know, I love bow ties. And one of the reasons why I kept my bow ties on always in Nigeria was because I wanted to get attention of the young people to realize that agriculture is sexy and it's cool.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and congratulations once again.
Pleasure. Always.
Thanks for speaking with us on Channels Television. We appreciate that.
Thank you.